Classic Conversations is brought to you by Palm Springs Life magazine, celebrating 50 years of bringing art and culture to Southern California.
The Michael H. Lord Gallery in Palm Springs is proud to support public television. Learn more about our paintings, photography, and sculpture at michaelhlordgallery.com or our North Palm Canyon location. Michael H. Lord Gallery, an oasis of contemporary art since 1978.
The Camelot Theaters, bringing you retrospective documentary and art films, foreign and award-winning motion pictures. And the following: Dr. Betty Baxter, certified life coach and consultant; Cash Baxter, the Betty M. Barker Trust; Serp and John Conti Foundation, and the Stephen Philibosian Foundation, supporting the arts, and the Virginia Waring International Piano Competition; Dorothy and Harold Meyerman, supporting the arts, and the Palm Springs Art Museum; Myron Clavin, Peggy and Donald Cravens; Rick and Rosine Supple, supporting the arts and the Palm Springs Cultural Center. Hello, everyone. I'm Gloria Greer. As a journalist for over 35 years, I have interviewed some of the most important and entertaining people of our time. So please join us as we sit back and enjoy classic conversations. My guest is Debbie S. Miller. She is a woman on a mission. She lives up in Alaska. She's absolutely passionate about the land, the wilderness, the animals. She has written numerous books for children and adults. Her newest is On Arctic Ground, and it'll show you something so remarkable. Okay, Debbie, you made a fabulous presentation at the Camelot, and you have been speaking really all over the United States. You do frequently. Your newest book, On Arctic Ground,
Yes.
is the subject that we were so enthralled with. So tell me how you became so passionate. First, how you became so passionate about Alaska. What made you move from the sophisticated San Francisco to the wilds
Oh my goodness.
Alaska?
Well, Gloria, it's so great to be here with you in the desert,
you.
and this is such a beautiful area where you live. Living in Northern California, I was brought up in an area where I was close to Muir Woods, the redwoods, the ocean. It was a beautiful environment as a child. And then as I grew older, I think I had a yearning to see more of that wildness. And so after I graduated from college, I was teaching in the Bay Area, and my husband and I decided to go on an adventure. We decided to leave our teaching jobs, pack up a camper, and head north. That was in 1975 for a one-year adventure. When we got to Alaska, they were in desperate need of teachers in many of the rural villages scattered throughout the state. And lo and behold, I got a teaching job in a very small Athabascan Indian village on the south side of the Brooks Range in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. What an adventure to move from the Bay Area to this remote village of 125 Indian people who spoke their own Gwich'in language, who had a traditional lifestyle, living off the land.
Okay, they spoke their language. I don't
Yes.
want to interrupt you, but I think we'll all wonder, then how were you able to converse with them? Did you have to learn their language?
Well, English was a second language.
I see, okay.
But when I was teaching, I
Yeah.
worked with an aide who spoke fluent Gwich'in, and so she was there to translate. When a child didn't understand something in studies,
Yeah.
she would be right there to explain it in the native language. So they spoke both, but it was definitely an amazing culture to get exposed to, because these people have lived off the land in a subsistence lifestyle for thousands of years. And here I was out learning about how they hunt the caribou and use the hides to make clothing, and it was just a fascinating culture.
Is that going on today?
It is still going on today. We have about 200 native villages in Alaska, and these are largely small, remote communities that might have a couple hundred, 300 people. And they may go fly into, say, Fairbanks and Anchorage to the large supermarkets. But for most of the people, they're out hunting and fishing like they always have, to put food on the table that comes from the land. And that's been a big tradition in Alaska, whether it's salmon, whether it's caribou, whether it's moose. The native traditions are, it's pretty remarkable.
Okay, now, then when did you start going out into the wild to write the books, and what prompted that? Let's talk about that a little.
Well, as a teacher, I had my summers off.
Uh-huh.
So that was the beginning.
Yeah.
I would go out for 3 months at a time and go hiking and rafting and climbing mountains. And I always took a journal. And I would write about all the details of the weather, the animals, their behavior. And this really inspired me. as it still does today, and it inspires me to write this wilderness, this beauty that we have in Alaska. And plus the fascination of all the animals and how they live and survive in an area where for 8 or 9 months, out of the year, it's snow-covered.
Yeah.
So.
The book not only is interesting to read, but there are the most remarkable photographs in it. And I'm going to take this and show just one because it is so amazing to me. And that's this one. The face on...
of a snowy owl.
It's a snowy owl, and it's amazing. It really is. I don't know if you can see the detail, but it is incredible. And the entire book is filled. And you see this, this animal, or not, the owl is absolutely lifelike when you look at that face.
Yes.
And you realize what you're living with and working with.
Yes. Well, the birds come from six continents to this area where I've studied in the National Petroleum Reserve, which is the subject of this new book.
Which leads us into a very important subject, and that's oil. But continue.
So we've got these birds, this tremendous diversity of birds, snowy owls like the one you saw, sandhill cranes, swans, hundreds of thousands of geese and loons, and shorebirds that come from places like Argentina or from New Zealand. And we even have a bird that comes from Africa that flies across the floor of Asia, across the Bering Straits, up into this remote corner of Alaska that has been a petroleum reserve since 1923.
Well, do they do any drilling there?
They have done some drilling there. It was designated as a petroleum reserve by President Warren Harding back in 1923. After World War I, he wanted to have an emergency supply of oil for the Navy, because we were just coming off the war and transitioning into an oil-based economy, and they had discovered oil along the coast. There were oil seeps. So he basically drew a boundary line around an area that's about the size of the state of Maine, and declared it as a petroleum reserve. And it sat there for many, many, many years. They began to explore it in the 1940s when we had a Second World War going on. And they did find some small quantities of oil and gas, and they've drilled about 100 or more wells in spotty areas, and they have found some reserves.
Yeah.
But none of it has been developed. That probably will in the future. Some of these areas will be developed. But we're talking about an area that represents the largest block of public land remaining in America. 10 Yellowstone National Parks would fit inside this area. So there is plenty of room to conserve areas that are important for wildlife while still allowing for petroleum development. And currently they are developing a plan that would do just that. A very balanced approach where half of the reserve would be open for oil and gas exploration and development, and the other half, with the most sensitive habitats for wildlife, would be protected and off limits.
And the people who live in Alaska, such as yourself, you're all in favor of that.
Many of us are in favor of it. And of course, there would be some that might say we should drill, baby, drill every acre of land on the north slope of Alaska. We have a vast area north of the Brooks Range Mountains, and many acres are already available to the industry on state of Alaska lands, about 14 million acres they have, where they have lease sales every year. And we have many fields that have been developed around Prudhoe Bay. But many of us believe that you want a balanced approach to resource development. We don't want to drill every acre of tundra.
Then you would lose all of this marvelous wildlife.
You'd lose the wilderness, certainly. You lose the wilderness character once you put in roads, pipelines, drilling facilities. You have traffic, oil spills, noise, garbage, the list goes on.
Right, of course.
And once you have that, it changes the landscape. Everybody knows that. So it's a matter of balance. Some areas you want to allow industrialization, but other areas that are especially important for migratory birds. The largest caribou herd, if you can imagine, lives in this reserve where I traveled and covered 600 miles by canoe and on foot.
Oh, my.
Over the course of 3 summers.
Did you do this with your family or alone? Tell me about that. Because you do have children.
I do have 2 wonderful daughters, but I did these trips with professional photographers and river guides, because we were out in a very remote frontier landscape where we took satellite phones, where we had bear spray, where we even in one case had a electric bear fence, because we were in an area that has the highest concentration of grizzly bears in the Arctic. So we had to be very careful of bears. with those kinds of concentrations.
I would think so. This is one of the photographs that you just opened the book to that you said you considered for the cover.
Yes, this was considered. This is one of my favorite photographs taken by Patrick Enders, who's an incredible landscape photographer who I paddled with down this particular river that you're seeing here, called the Naigu River. And you're looking across the Brooks Range foothills here. There's still a little bit of snow because this is early June. But believe it or not, you've got birds nesting all in the tundra grasses here, Dall sheep up in the mountains, caribou crossing the river, and grizzly bears along the river. And we had a wolf den that was just upstream from our camp that we heard howling when we were having breakfast.
Oh, good heavens.
So this is all in this one picture.
Yeah, okay, but is there ever any fear on the part of, you know,
Oh, of course.
you?
Well, you've got to be...
Supposing a wolf decides to say hello.
Right. Well, we don't worry so much about the wolves because that would be a rare thing for a wolf to attack a person. I think
But a bear?
But bears we worry about.
Yeah.
We do worry about bears, and we come prepared with bear spray and sometimes bear fences that we use.
Yeah.
And then we watch. You know, we're looking out at the landscape all the time, looking for signs of bear, looking for places where they might have diggings, you know, where they might have buried, you know, something, you know, where they might come back, which... You know, we don't camp in those areas.
Yeah.
And we watch. We have binoculars and spotting scopes, and we're careful where we pitch our tents, not to be on an active bear trail.
Supposing somebody wanted to actually do something like that, there must be companies that take people on trips like this.
Oh, there are. I have a number of friends that actually take people into the wilderness that go down these rivers, and they're fantastic trips. You really get to see the country in a different way than you would on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
Certainly, because you are out in the wilderness.
Right. You know, we were talking before about the children's books, but you actually started writing the adult books first.
Yes.
So what prompted that?
Well, what prompted the adult books was I was inspired by the wilderness and these adventures that I had had over a 14-year period exploring the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This inspired me to write my first book for adults about those adventures. Then I had children, you know, and that changed my world. Suddenly I was immersing myself in children's books, and I had two daughters who loved Alaska animals and were constantly wanting to learn more about their behaviors and life cycles. And there wasn't that much out, you know, in the nonfiction genre.
Yeah.
So I decided to start, take my time and research subjects that my children were interested in, and I started studying the caribou and the polar bears and the different environments of Alaska and writing children's books.
Yeah, and but they are not, you did not use that to do a fictional story about an animal.
No.
You actually, they're nonfiction.
They're nonfiction, and I spend a lot of time with scientists, with wildlife biologists, going out in the field, watching the animals, asking lots of questions, and then I gather all that information. I put it in a story context for children. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's hard work. And then I work with this fantastic artist, John Van Zyl, who is able to paint these extraordinary pictures that represent the landscapes and these beautiful animals that we have.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you also go to schools now throughout the United States.
I do.
And present programs.
Do. Many schools study the Arctic. They study Alaska animals. They study adaptations of animals. And so my books tie in with curriculum. And so I often go in to speak to those classes that have already read my books and have questions, and I show them how books are made, and then I bring with me things from Alaska for them to see so they can touch a real piece of fur from, say, a caribou.
Yeah. Very interesting. Wonderful to be so passionate about something. Okay, we talked about the oil. You talked about the fact that there is a plan if it continues. I guess the Secretary of Interior was in Alaska and came up with this plan recently. This is something fairly new?
This is something very new. There has never been a comprehensive management plan for the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, and it's been there since 1923. Under this current administration, they've developed a plan based on public process and lots of hearings that took place last year. And now the Secretary has come up with a preferred alternative for management that would protect about half of the reserve. Over 11 million acres would be off limits for oil and gas, while still allowing the other half of the reserve open for oil and gas leasing. So it's a very balanced, approach to resource development, and many of us think this is a great first step.
Now, you mentioned the leasing, And of
Yes.
course, it's up to the big companies as to whether they want to lease there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
when we talk about, oh, we're not doing enough to go into the reserves in Alaska, it isn't only up to the government then, is it? It's
Well,
up to the private companies.
It is up to the private companies to bid on the leases when the lease sales occur. And every year we have lease sales in Alaska, both state and federal lease sales. Millions of acres are made available to industry every year through state leases and federal leases.
Yeah.
And so it is up to them to decide which acres they want to bid on and lease for a period of 10, 15 years. And then it's up to them to decide when they're going to explore.
But you mentioned how expensive it is up
It's
there to do that.
It is. Doing business in Alaska is very expensive. Logistically, the support they need, the distance they have to travel, the roads, many of these areas are roadless. And so they have to go in by helicopter, or they only do the exploration in the wintertime when there's adequate snow cover so the tundra won't be damaged. So there's a lot of this that goes into any sort of an oil exploration program. We do, however, have about 30 producing fields on the north slope of Alaska that takes up about 1,000 square miles. So we have a lot of oil development currently that has expanded from Prudhoe Bay, which everybody has heard of. Our largest field in America is the Prudhoe Bay oil fields. And now we have pipelines that extend over 100 miles across the tundra to these other fields that have feeder pipelines that tie into the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So this is a vast area that has been industrialized.
Yeah, but what about the big pipeline that we keep hearing about that will or won't be built?
Oh, the natural gas pipeline. There has been talk of building a natural gas pipeline for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I think that will occur at a time when the companies feel it is the right time economically. Right now, they're still working on getting oil out of the ground. And they use the natural gas that actually pressurizes the field that helps them get that oil out of the ground. So if they were to produce the natural gas in many of these areas, they'd lose the pressure to get the oil out of the ground. So it's really, it's up to the companies to decide when and where this will all happen. I think they have a lot of control over these leases that they own, and right now they focus on oil.
Is this safer than going into the ocean?
Is it safer going into the ocean? I would have to say that the
From your-
ocean,
yeah.
from my perspective, would be the most high-risk proposition, because there is no way to clean up an oil spill when you have sea ice conditions. There's no proven technology, and the industry admits that. Of course, they say there's little chance that a blowout would happen. But if it did, it would be catastrophic, because unlike, say, the Gulf of Mexico or even the Exxon Valdez oil spill, they at least could take action and attempt to clean up that oil. It would be insurmountable what they would be working against if you had sea ice conditions and winds and surging waves. And the nearest Coast Guard station is about 1,000 miles away.
Good
So we're in an extremely remote area.
Yeah.
And oil, in that environment, you've got a tremendous amount of life. Ice seals and polar bears and walruses, and beluga whales. The highest concentration of beluga whales are in this area where they're drilling right now.
Has it affected them in any way, or only if something catastrophic happens?
Well, the oil spill is the biggest risk,
Yeah.
certainly, and then the sound that occurs when they are drilling oftentimes will affect, say, bowhead whales during their migration. So the companies, for instance, this year, they weren't allowed to drill until the Inupiaq Eskimo people were able to do their hunting and harvesting the bowhead whale. And then they resumed drilling. So this is a sensitive area. But I think that the greatest concern is a catastrophic oil spill. We see these spills all across our oceans.
Yeah.
Northern Australia had a catastrophic spill. The North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico. How many spills does it take before we realize that we have other alternatives for our economy? We have renewable, clean energy that we are developing right now, and it's very promising. And it's exciting to think that one day we will be off this habit of using dirty fossil fuels.
I heard you talk to your daughter, and she said, what were you saying? This is before we're on camera. And you said, we're talking about in your future, that this will happen in her future.
Yes, in her future. I like to think of it as, my grandmother grew up in the early 1900s, and she rode a pony to school. And that's when we were first starting to get, the Model T came on the road. And who would have thought that we would transition so quickly from horse and buggy to a Model T, and then now we have these millions and millions of cars that are using fossil fuels. Well, I feel like right now at the beginning of this century, we are transitioning away from that. We're starting to see more hybrids, electric cars, and even technology where they can put copper coils embedded in the road to recharge your car as you're driving down the road. This is pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So it'll be a different world, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
And hopefully this will all be preserved, this wonderful
that's the
area.
hope. That's the hope.
I must say, I've been to Alaska on a ship, the cruise ship.
Yes.
And of course you don't really see Alaska that way, actually, at all.
You can see great beauty on a cruise ship.
Yes,
but when you get out in these remote areas, you feel like Lewis and Clark as we traveled, paddling down the river, seeing caribou herds cross the river in front of you, watching a wolf carrying a leg of a caribou back to a den to feed its pups, having a grizzly bear look at you across the river when you wake up in the morning and your heart is, beating, thumping. These are iconic species that really paint a picture of our wilderness heritage of America, and we want to have some of that in the future.
Absolutely.
We can't use it all up.
Right.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Now, what about global warming? Are you seeing the effects of that?
We are seeing tremendous effects in Alaska. Well, I've lived there since 1975. Glaciers that I climbed on in 1975 no longer exist. Glaciers are receding all across the state. We have the sea ice conditions are completely different. This year we set a new record. An area the size of Texas melted around the polar region close to Alaska, which is very hard on the polar bears, the ice seals. We have 4 species of seals that depend on ice. We have polar bear populations, walruses. So they're losing the floor. Their habitat is disappearing at this incredible rate of melting. So we're seeing changes, dramatic changes, just even since 1975.
Yeah. And throughout the history of the world, there have been climate changes. The Ice Age, we read about. So it is not unusual to, over a period of years and years and years, to have these changes.
Yes. Oh, definitely. We used to have dawn redwood trees on the north slope of Alaska, and dinosaurs. We had polar dinosaurs, 13 species of dinosaurs. I actually found a bone that wrote about it in this book, a 75-million-year-old duck-billed dinosaur ankle bone that I found. And so we did have a changing, very different climate if we go back 300, 400,000 years, millions of years. What is different about today is the rate of speed that we are traveling. Since the Industrial Revolution, the temperature changes are dramatic. They're accelerating higher and higher. And the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, our greenhouse gases, are at a higher level than ever before in climate history. So in this way, it's very different. We're going at a much faster rate. And the only thing we can really point to is what man has done to the environment with what we are putting into the atmosphere. There are scientists out there that believe that we can fix this by reducing things like black carbon and methane and controlling what we are releasing into the atmosphere, that we can actually curb this. So there is hope here. I think it's important for us to know that.
Right. And I think it's wonderful that you are very optimistic.
I am.
Despite all this, for the future. And I do hope that, our viewers on Arctic Ground is such an interesting book. And where can people find it?
Well, you can find it just about anywhere, online and in your local bookstore. You can order it. It's a wonderful publication. Braided River is the publisher, and they're a nonprofit education-based publisher that they try to introduce people to wild places that are threatened, that need protection. So
I want to thank you so much.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thank you. We will be back with you next time. So do stay with us, and you can follow me sometimes on Twitter, Facebook, anyway, and my website, www.gloriagreer.com. Again, thank you, and we will see you next time. Classic Conversations is brought to you by Palm Springs Life magazine, celebrating 50 years of bringing art and culture to Southern California.
The Michael H. Lord Gallery in Palm Springs is proud to support public television. Learn more about our paintings, photography, and sculpture at michaelhlordgallery.com or our North Palm Canyon location. Michael H. Lord Gallery, an oasis of contemporary art since 1978.
The Camelot Theaters, bringing you retrospective documentary and art films, foreign and award-winning motion pictures. And the following: Dr. Betty Baxter, certified life coach and consultant; Cash Baxter, the Betty M. Barker Trust; Serp and John Conti Foundation, and the Stephen Philibosium Foundation, supporting the arts, and the Virginia Waring International Piano Competition; Myron Clavin, Peggy and Donald Cravens; Rick and Rosine Supple, supporting the arts and the Palm Springs Cultural Center; and Dorothy and Harold Meyerman, supporting the arts and the Palm Springs Art Museum.